Hello, Ben.
Good evening, Chezi.
Let me add the link.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if anyone wants to join, all are welcome as always. All right.
Almost done with chapter 3.
Are we almost done with chapter 3?
Almost.
How many do we have right now?
Well, we have a big one now.
Design. All right, it's big, and then you.
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay, so we'll finish these two. Okay, good. Thank God. So wait, we're going into chapter 4
Mm-hmm.
out of 6. Okay, very nice. Very nice. Exciting.
Yeah.
Starting to now think about like the next thing. So how many things do you have going on altogether? There's Pirkei Avot, you have Tanya. You have I overheard you say you have a Guide to the Perplexed.
I have Guide to the Perplexed. I'm trying to get some more stuff in person, but locally I have like a Talmud, like a Talmud class and another Hasidus class, kind of like small.
And out of those, you don't have to rate them, so to speak. I know I win, but I'm saying you don't have to rate them. But what is it? Your experience? What has your experience been?
I mean, I love it. It's great to have to. It's amazing to have. It makes me feel grateful that you just have those things that I have those things available to me. Both the people that are learning with me. So very grateful for you too for doing this and everything, and just the sages obviously for writing and transmitting this. In terms of how I would rate it, I think it's probably also connected to the people that I do it. But I would say this and the Tanya are very much very insightful for me. And I do enjoy. I do more of the parsha and all the commentaries and Rashi kind of by myself, and that's good. And I do that with my wife more. So
That's
all
nice.
of them, it's very hard to it's very hard to rate because they're also very relational. Like I do them with different people, and
Do you find yourself identifying a pattern though between the different stuff you're learning, as in like where a comment from let's say Guide to the Perplexed relates to something you learned from the parasha, which relates to something that you learned in Pirkei Avot?
100%.
Okay, so that's obviously that's nice when that happens, when you start being like being able to reference all those elements. Do you find different methodologies or theological understandings between, let's say, Jacob and I have differences of how like we'll interpret certain things? Obviously, there's a core that is similar because we're all hanging out the same well, so to speak. But do you notice differences? Are you like, well, like, Chezi's a lot more loosey goosey, I don't know, with these terms, and like this rabbi's like a lot more specific? And
I actually don't notice that much difference. I mean, there's definitely, maybe here we definitely kind of touch on, we have more of kind of like a historical context, and some other things put into it, and I definitely appreciate that because it helps me connect more things. With Jacob, and I kind of very much specifically just to Tanya, and which is necessary because Tanya is really just like deep in itself to kind of like grasp that whole world. So I also just appreciate just being able to live in that world even for an hour or 2 hours while I do while I do Tanya. And then once I try to understand that, I can like move outside and put in more things and connect them. I was actually thinking about that in terms of like how I learned the parsha, in terms of, okay, let me just read the narrative of what is happening. And then once I have the body of the narrative, which obviously there's so much that I'm not getting by just reading the narrative. But if I just read the narrative, then when I start reading the commentaries, I can start connecting things into the narrative. And I know, oh, this hooks into here and this connects into here. So, and this is kind of maybe like my thought with some of these, where they kind of allow me to hook into different things.
Well, you might not be doing this like intentionally, but you are. There's an acronym called the Pardes, the orchard, and in Hebrew it's Pei Reish Dalet Samech, meaning Pshat, Drash, Raj, Sod, and by your current syllabus is allowing you to walk across this orchard, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, that's a very nice experience. And you are privileged in a certain sense to, be studying the Guide to the Perplexed, right? Like with like this diving into like this Aristotelian land, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you're armed with Tanya.
Right.
So
yeah.
That's like a beautiful way to, and as we've seen over here, when you're armed with Tanya, like one sentence could mean like the exact opposite of like what it means. And you're like, so like suddenly like, there's a whole new world in front of me. So that's nice. It's nice to hear that you like are aware of those, that you feel that. And it's just so nice to hear that you have, that you have all those outlets basically to really engage in. Kol hakavod.
Yeah, I'm trying to make up for lost time, but also when I get into something, I go deep into it. So it's nice.
I opened up, or Jacob opened up like this Noahide little room. So we're going to be doing we're going to be going over specifically over their prayer book and their Shulchan Aruch, so to speak, their guide, their practical guidebook. But I'm also potentially going to like do maybe some parasha. Maybe we'll do something else over there as well. So, and obviously you're always welcome to join. You're welcome to join everything. I don't know if you're interested in like how the Noahites prayer, but if you are, we're going to do that as well. All right, let's get cracking.
Let's do it.
Can we scroll back for a moment?
Yeah, we are back.
We're there. Okay, Zayin. Right. So this was talking about these analogies of the storekeeper. God is opening up the store, pointing out again to the tremendous amount of abundance that we have, and how understanding God is by the fact that he's offering us credit, and the storekeeper is sort of doing his rounds, and that is allowing us a chenvani makif, and this is allowing us sort of he's giving us space to sort of window shop. However, with all this freedom, we have to recognize that, like what we said earlier, that hakol rashui hakol tzafui v'rashut natuna, as in everything is preordained or predestined, yet we have free will. So here too, we see the storekeeper is allowing us to do whatever we want in the store. However, at the end of the day, we're still inside the store, and you could do whatever you want. You could take this credit, but at some point, the credit, the bookkeeper, the account keeper comes, and payment is due. And because you have this freedom, you could also choose. We use an analogy of the store of like, you could decide to buy yourself Whole Foods. You could decide to buy yourself Dr. Pepper, and destroy yourself. So like those are all decisions that one has to make for himself. But God is giving you those options. And it ended over here that you should be confident that whether with your knowledge or without your knowledge, like there's a cause and effect. There's ramifications for the things you do. That God is the judge of truth, and ultimately we said we're all preparing for this feast. All of this is being prepared for the feast, and this we said was an interpretation of sort of all your life is putting together is getting everything together for the feast in the world to come, right? Mm-hmm. Inside the sukkah of the Leviathan. There are some that look at this as that this is the meal over here. The feast is the feast of death, the last meal you're going to have, so to speak. Because ultimately, that's like at the end of the line, it ends. And you have to realize that you're preparing up to that moment, so to speak. We obviously went more in depth into that, but that was just a small, reminder of where we were. So let's continue. Okay, number Yud Zayin 17. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Im אין תורה, אין דרך ארץ. אם אין דרך ארץ, אין תורה. אם אין חוכמה, אין יראה. אם אין יראה, אין חוכמה. אם אין דת, אין בינה. אם אין בינה, אין דת. אם אין קמח, אין תורה. אם אין תורה, אין קמח. הוא היה אומר, כל שחוכמתו מרובה ממעשיו, למה הוא דומה? לאילן שענפיו מרובין ושורשיו מעוטין. והרוח בא ועוקרתו והופכת אותו על פניו, שנאמר, והיה כערער בערבה, ולא יראה כי יבוא טוב, ושכן חרחרים במדבר, ארץ מלאכה ולא תושב. אבל כל שמעשיו מרובין מחוכמתו, למה הוא דומה? לאילן שענפיו מעוטין, ושורשיו מרובין, שאפילו כל הרוחות שבעולם באות ונושבות בו, אין מזיזין אותו ממקומו, שנאמר, והיה כעץ שתול על מים, ועל יובל ישלח שורשיו, ולא יראה כי יבוא חום, והיה עליהו רענן, ובשנת בצורת לא ידאג, ולא ימיש מעשות פרי. Okay, let's, I think we'll split this up, and let's start with the first portion over here. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Azariah, would say, if there is no Torah, there is no common decency. If there's no common decency, there is no Torah. If there's no wisdom, there is no fear of God. If there's no fear of God, there is no wisdom. If there's no applied knowledge, there is no analytical knowledge. If there's no analytical knowledge, there's no applied knowledge. If there's no flower, there is no Torah. If there's no Torah, there is no flower. So I would say let's stop there for a second and dive in. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, he is he is a descendant of Ezra Sofer, Ezra the scribe. So pretty big deal. Ezra was a big deal as well. He was known for being extremely, extremely wealthy. Some ungodly amount of money, which I think the Gemara gives examples that I think some of them are more trying to sound a little like over the top, but clearly very, very wealthy. He was sort of the interim Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin, instead of Rabbi Gamliel. At the time, Rabbi Gamliel got kicked out because we spoke about this in the past, I believe also. He was very intense. He made Rav Yehoshua and Rav Gamliel were having a disagreement with regards to how to calculate for the dates and when Yom Kippur comes. And Rabbi Gamliel said, because I'm the authority, I'm telling you when it is. And even according to your calculation, you're going to come to me on what you consider Yom Kippur with money in your hand, right? So after he did 3 or 4 of these moves, which were super intense, you have to assume people were like, Gamliel, come on, dude, relax. But he was very intense about this, and he gets cast out. So Rav Eliezer ben Azariah takes his place, which famously he gets very nervous because he was young. Some say that he was 17 years old. And we hear about him also in the Agadah when we have Passover night. we read he's one of the characters that was studying all night long, and he says, "Ki ben shivim shana." Harani ki ben shivim shana. I am as if someone that was 70. And they say, what does that mean? Why do you not say that you were 70? And the reason is because the story goes is that when he became the Nasi, he didn't want people to look at him in an odd way because he's so young. So God blessed him that his hair became white and he seemed much older. And he says, Keben shivim shana, as I was as if 7 years old. He's also, and this I guess alludes a little to the conversation we had. This alludes a little to the conversation we had with, Maimonides and the Tanya and different interpretations. He was known, or famously known, for using the term Dibra HaTorah Bilshon Bnei Adam, that the Torah speaks in the language of man. However, even that term has different interpretations. So his interpretation was more straightforward. I mean, and also that's unlike Rabbi Akiva that would look at the shape of the letter and give you interpretations. His attitude is more like the language that the Torah is using at times. Like if you see a doubling up of a certain word, that's just because that was common at the time to speak that way. Maimonides does a complete flip on this though, and says that no, that the fact that it says that the Torah speaks in the language of men takes into consideration the vastness of the human intellect. And that's why that what men could think about was included inside, basically. So it's not, don't take it literally, rather take it, it should be as literal as the human comprehension and intellect could go, right? So if we could think of allegories, then even that's sort of in the running. and then we'll have the mystics that will take a literal and metaphorical understanding of such things. So if, let's say, we're breathing, so that's air coming, let's say, from the depth of my body, from the depths of my soul, and coming out, and that could be a cry, and that could be a yell, and that could be a prayer, but that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean it's only going to be limited to words or speech. And the same when God breathes into the nefesh hachaya, into man, right? So there's a sense where literally also there's God's essence, whatever that means, coming from his depth and making its way out into us, which is also not confined only to words, right? There's a sense where he could be doing that just like I could be doing that with air. So now, is there a difference? Yes. But here again, I'm using the little term to explore a much more abstract idea. So that was just, sorry for that little tangent. Just it was connecting to what we said earlier.
Yeah.
What else was he known for? He's known for the famous line about the Beit Din, the courthouse, being a katlani, being a murderous one, once every 70 years. That was his interpretation. He was known for how the Beit Din basically never actually killed someone. Okay, but as we were saying, so that's Ben Azariah, and he tells us im ein Torah in derech eretz, im ein derech eretz and Torah. So what we're seeing here basically is what seems like contradictions, but this repeats itself as we saw, of two elements that are codependent in a certain sense. There's different interpretations. While let's say Rambam will see them as codependent, you need both of these things at the same time. So it's very much like a chicken and the egg on both sides. However, some will interpret this as these are different levels of the same thing. So if Maimonides is saying each one is independent and both needed to move forward, you could argue that there is one version of derech eretz, of common decency or of basic morality, or let's say of morality, but it would be in its basic form. And then there's another level of derech eretz, which is derech eretz empowered by Torah, which is then derech eretz 2.0, right? Which is now it's a more advanced version or more a phase shift version of that morality. So that would be looking at the same concept, just they're building off each other.
I mean, all of these things are kind of remind me of discussions that I've heard in the past, and we've had them. We also talked about this last week, of top down versus bottom up, emergence, emanation, or spirit and body. So fighting for, so giving to the poor, as well as doing something, or as well as wearing tefillin, like the spirit and the body. So yeah.
And like you mentioned, there's a sentiment of a repeating pattern, so to speak. However, you could also see that Chazal and our sages were constantly trying to strike this balance where you could see them focusing on one thing and then always focusing on the other thing, and trying to constantly and at different times, because this is happening throughout a different timeline, while we could see the community is acting A, so we're going to react Y. We're going to push a little more of this, but it seems like they took this too seriously. I mean, for example, one of Jesus's criticisms, right? Like, do as we preach, not as we do, right? As far as like the rabbis at the time, because you could argue saying that, like, we're saying a lot of things, but our actions are not following suit. And here there's a constant conversation about how those things need to be matching. But specifically with the wisdom and the Torah knowledge and the common decency or basic morality. So another way of, let's say, looking how these are codependent would be without being aware of, like, I won't be able to act correctly in the world, right? If I'm lacking the understanding and reason behind all things, right? So if I need the Torah sort of for my oculus to give me my understanding of what I'm doing. However, on the flip side, before I could put on my oculus, I have to have a conversation, which is like, I still had to buy the oculus, say thank you to the person, still work within the system of this morality, which allows me then to grasp the concepts of the Torah, because those concepts, while I need them to move forward properly, I still need those undergirding principles to allow me to engage the Torah in a certain perspective.
Yeah.
So both of them are feeding off each other. Or we're good on that, or you want to expand?
Yeah, I know. I just have like a gazillion metaphors coming into my head as like
share one.
I mean, they're not necessarily insightful metaphors. I'm just thinking. I'm thinking about appetite and eating, and food. I'm thinking about like a business that has money. If there's investments coming in, but you need to do something with the investment. So if you don't have a reason, if you don't have a problem that you're trying to solve, then the money doesn't do anything. There is nothing to do with the money. So
I think that, I was going to say that relates, I think, to the next line, but I wanted to just pick up on one of these comments over here. Marie Antoinette syndrome, the condition which hair suddenly turned white. The unhappy Marie Antoinette of France, hair allegedly turned white the night before the guillotine during the French Revolution. I hear you. Okay. Thank you for that interesting tidbit. What does she famously say? Like something about like letting them eat cakes or something like that, right? Let them eat cake.
Bread. There's no bread, so let them eat.
Right, let them eat cake.
Yeah.
And upcycle, hello, small comment. The complete criticism of the kind of philosophy boils down to the error of the first doctrine of. Okay, you are welcome to expand on that a little.
Pharmacist, something with drugs.
I cannot comment onto this, but I'm going to trust your upcycle. All right, so our next line is Im ein chokhmah ein yirah. Im ein yirah ein chokhmah. If there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom, and if there's no wisdom, there's no fear of God. So here too, we've discussed this a little in the past about like fear, and we're not talking about, let's say, the fear of, fear from, let's say, a burglar or someone coming to harm you. Rather, this is reverence in a certain respect. So, like you were mentioning about like a business, like if a person doesn't have a path or like a goal, they're not going to have this fear from diverting from this goal. They're not going to have this. They're not going to have the idea to move forward, right? If you have a goal and you have the tools allotted to you of actually how to move forward in that path, then you start getting very nervous. If I get very nervous if I then see myself deviating from that path, because I have a goal and I could see how I'm deviating from that. So here it requires me to have wisdom to cultivate a certain path for me, and then that will lead me, once I have that path in front of me, I start getting scared or being fearful of the fact that I could deviate from this path. Or like we said, the fear is not that God's going to be mad at me. It's rather that I realize how I am disconnecting from him at that point. And that's the fear, is the disappointment there is from the full potential I could have reached.
And realizing that there
correct.
is something above you, or there is some responsibility or goal that you're
however, if you don't have a path, right, then you're not going to have any of that fear, right? If you don't cultivate that wisdom, if you don't have that goal in front of you, if you don't have that wisdom, then you're not going to be able to build that fear that drives you in a certain extent to move forward. Like we just said about Modeh Ani, when I wake up in the morning, it requires me to, in a certain sense, recognize how small I am to then realize how valuable I actually am, because even the small little significant element still has a relationship or is being called on by the divine. So both of those things are things we need to take into consideration and straddle both of those elements and hold both of those elements at the same time. Also, you could interpret this as to fear God properly, right? And not, let's say, like a child fears God, but to properly revere God, it requires understanding God's greatness. And the only way you get to understanding God's greatness is via the intellect, via understanding and comprehending and grasping more and more robust ideas, which then allow you to further understand, right, the greatness of God. So again, like what I was saying, if I wake up in the morning and I'm aware of black holes and I'm aware of quantum mechanics, I'm aware of those things. So those things could be crippling, but they could also be inspiring at the same time. So you need that space also to, again, chicken and egg sort of situation over here. And this pattern, as we see, is like repeating itself again and again, which is you have like these two elements that need each other. Im ein dat ein bina, im ein bina ein dat. In English, if there's no applied knowledge, there's no analytical knowledge. If there's no analytical knowledge, there's no applied knowledge. So I see how they're interpreting over here. The way I've understood it was dot is the capacity to discern. And bina would be more about analyzing and synthesizing. And here I think they would call it like the analytical knowledge and the applied knowledge of like what you could actually, how you could actually apply. Once you've discerned, you could actually like apply that. So you require dot, right? We acquire discernment to allow us to make judgment calls, have an actual system that allows us to move forward in the world before we need to start analyzing all the data, right? I need to know, like, is this the right way to go right now? Is this not the right way to go? I need to have that basic understanding of discernment. And on the flip side, if I don't spend time analyzing and synthesizing and actually understanding what I'm looking at, I won't be able to actually fully discern, because I could, and at a basic level, I could be like wrong, right? But at a more complicated level, I need to better understand what wrong means and better understand what right means to then fully, again, discern for the next phase.
Right, so, because context changes, things are in flux. You need to account for different things.
There's interpretations that say that dot are the things that you learn from your rabbi, while bina are things that are self-taught. And here again, you need both, right? I need a rabbi to guide my learning. However, I need intelligence to be able to comprehend what the rabbi is actually telling me. So like, right, if I'm not gonna step up, so to speak, you're going to be talking to a wall. But even if I step up to class, if I don't have the tools of how to do this, it's going to be very difficult for me to move forward.
Yeah. One way that I was thinking about bina and dat is that bina is like, let's say they're saying analytical, it's like propositional knowledge, and dat is the experiential knowledge. So taking that knowledge and acting on it. So the example would be like of somebody that has bina, but not that. Somebody that has analytical but not applied knowledge is a doctor that spends time on his lunch time at the parking lot smoking a cigarette. He knows what the cigarette is doing, yet he does not apply the knowledge to his life. So, but I'm trying to think how that works here.
Well, it actually works. That example, I believe, is going to work more when we get down to in the next part where we're talking about shachachmato merubam ma'asav.
Yeah,
where we're like, I think there relates more, but I mean, this is clearly alluding to it as the whole Pirkei Avot leads us down that path. Yeah. Okay. So the next pairing is if there's no flour, there is no Torah. If there is no Torah, there is no flour. So flour in this case is representing like the physical well-being of, that we have, and like the, how we need to take care and nurture, how taking care of the body is also nurturing the soul on a very basic level of, if you're only going to be drinking this and are you going to be pulling all-nighters all day, then you're going to get sick, and then you didn't do a favor to anyone, not to the learning, not to your Torah, not to your decent morality, because you're basically bedridden. So that was pointless. And you could also look about it going back to the derech eretz again, which is if en kemach, if you don't have the fundamentals, which is if you don't have what you need to sustain you, whether it's the proper glasses, the conversation with your wife before you left the house, making sure your taxes are paid. If you're worried about all those stuff, you're not going to be able to move forward with Torah, so to speak, easily, because the basics, while we know that the basic undergirding everything is Torah and God, but the basics of our physical life still requires maintenance and sustenance.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, we could looking at it in ein Torah and kemach, how if there's no Torah, there's no flour, which is showing us that we need actual spiritual nourishment for like a balanced life. And when we're looking at baking bread, right, where we're taking like, I need the wheat, and ultimately I make this beautiful piece of this loaf of bread, and Israel has fantastic bread. At the end of the day, before I could sustain myself on this yummy bread with hummus, right, I first require the purest version of that bread, which is the flour, right? I need to even take the wheat and I need to grind it down to its most purest form. So here the attitude would be, what's really going to give you sustenance? Yes, you need food, but ultimately you need to interact with Torah, which is like the core, which is the essence, which is the flour. And that nourishment will allow you then to develop that into something you put inside the oven, cultivating in you, ultimately producing bread that you could actually eat and sustain yourself with.
Yeah, I mean, if we can kind of continue with the metaphor of the flour, I almost see here Torah as the germ. What do you call it? The starter. The how do you call that? Shmarim.
Shmarim. The
yeast.
The yeast.
It's the yeast that you put into the flour that makes it rise.
Well, the problem with that analogy would be like that it's secondary, right? The idea would be that like even the wheat itself is still not its purest form. Like the wheat would be nature. The flour would be God's will, right? As in God has allowed you to look at nature and you can make a blessing on it at one level. Wow, how nice this flower is. But can you then take God's will and see how you could now, like him, create and break it down to its core, right? Understanding its fundamentals, and now turn it into bread.
Yeah. Another way that I was thinking about this is Torah is the infinite. So maybe that's very abstract, but even when you think about like kemach, or in this analogy, Torah is like the secret for sustainability, for how do you gain, how do you, like you said, how do you not break down after working too hard for 6 days. Like the Torah, one of its biggest secrets is that it's a view into the infinite, which allows you to understand how to live sustainably, how to live, across time. So, and there's something that when I have discussions about, just even from a utilitarian perspective, about thinking why is religion necessary? Why is it necessary to take part of these rituals? A lot of this sometimes boils down to from a utilitarian point of view, boils down to like, this is way more, like if we do this, is way more, it's more sustainable.
I mean, that's John Vervaeke's a religion that's not a religion, right? I mean, he's just trying to ultimately, he realizes the psychology of practices and all these moves, even the 4 Ps. This is, I mean, we're just doing it right now, we're just doing it through like our hand of tradition, and like it's just great code that's tried and true.
Yeah.
The jargon we're using now wasn't the jargon at the time. But like we've looked at in the past, a lot of this is bumping up against, let's say, the Greek philosophies of the time, which are undergirding a lot of, let's say, the Enlightenment values that we have, and where the world has come up until now. So, from a utilitarian point of view, it's always fun to find in your backyard that you've had like a great, you've been running great code for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think obviously this is very relevant. As we move on, let's read in English again. Let's read in Hebrew again, and we'll read in English again the next portion over here. הוא היה אומר, כל שחוכמתו מרובה ממעשיו, למה הוא דומה? לאילן שענפיו מרובין ושורשיו מעוטין, והרוח באה ועוקרתו והופכתו על פניו, שנאמר, והיה כערער בערבה ולא יראה כי יבוא טוב, ושכן חרחרים במדבר ארץ מלחה ולא תשב. וכל שמעשיו מרובין מחוכמתו, למה הוא דומה? לאילן שענפיו מעוטין ושורשיו מרובין, אפילו כל הרוחות שבעולם באות ונושבות בו, אינן מזיזות אותו ממקומו. שנאמר, והיה כעץ שתול על מים, ויובל ישלח שורשיו, ולא יראה כי יבוא חום, והיה עליו רענן, ובשנת בצורת לא ידאג, ולא ימיש מעשרות פרי. So in English, we have over here, he would also say, one whose wisdom is greater than his deeds, what is he comparable to? To a tree with many branches and few roots. Comes a storm and it uproots it, and it turns onto its face. As it is stated, he shall be a lone tree in the wasteland and shall not see when good comes. He shall dwell perched in the desert, a salt land uninhabited. But, that was from Jeremiah, but one whose deeds are greater than his wisdom, to what he is compared to a tree with many roots and few branches, whom all the storms in the world cannot budge from its place. As it is stated, he shall be as a tree planted upon water, who spreads his roots by the river, who fears not when it comes to heat, whose leaf is ever lush, who worries not in the year of drought, and ceases not to yield fruit.
Very interesting. Almost like I would have the expectation that wisdom would be the foundation, but here they say the deeds are the foundation. The deeds are the roots.
Well, you're saying that, but you also contradict yourself, because earlier you were saying it's about these practiced things, right? My wisdom only goes so far. So let's break that down. So the two verses, right? One is alluding to being like a very weak and dried up tree in the middle of the desert in the wasteland, right? So while you could be looking at a tree and running over and being like, oh wow, in the middle of in the desert, there's a tree over here. We all know that its days are numbered. There's no foundation over there. And on the flip side, you have over here this other tree, which is, and the verse they use, it's a tree that's literally, its roots are by the riverbank, right? So it's always absorbing and getting nourished by the water that's always there. And it doesn't matter if it's rain or sun, it's evergreen or ever lush. And it has no concerns, right? Because it's always connected to the source. So And like you were saying in the previous, or you're alluding to this in the previous sections, we were just doing these comparisons where they're interconnected. And here we're saying, no, it's actually the actions and the embodiment are playing like a leading role over here. And which, the roots themselves are more important than the branches over here. And this is to point out that wisdom comes at the end of the day. Wisdom comes from the practical experience you have.
Well, I don't know if more important. I don't know if more important, but it almost like it comes before because it needs to hook into something. I mean, I'm reminded what I said about the parasha, where I want to know the narrative, the material, the body of what happened, and then when I have these as the commentaries about specific things, I know where to put them. So it's kind of the roots,
So yes, you required wisdom, right, to understand the words that people are saying, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes back to what we said earlier, like in chokhmah and dat, like you need those things to have the conversation. However, like you just said, like ultimately, it's the practical experience that then allows me to judge or look at my wisdom or use my wisdom properly, because I could only get so far if I'm just doing self-contemplation in my room. It doesn't matter how brilliant I am. Right? Like, is this going to work? Can this be tested? I could have all the theories I want. They could be very, very impressive, but could I actually now go to the board, write this out, and actually test it out and see if these things on the ground work in reality? Obviously, this is unlike the Greeks that come and value, the concept of just wisdom, right? It's all about the intellect. And, as far as Aristotle is concerned, you could have a wicked smart man, right? Like it's not great, but there's like this, he still does all the value to his intellect. And in Judaism, we have Ushmeltem vasitem ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem le'enei kol hamim. And the verse over there is that you keep and you act according to my commandments, because by doing so, by acting and by doing, that will be how the world looks at you and sees your wisdom, because they're going to see code that works. Right. You could go around and talking. So the Torah says, it stresses, don't go out there and start talking about how, and this is another good example, which connects to it. The first Rashi of the Torah, which we discussed, says, why did the Torah even start with this metaphysics, which you could say Aristotle would be super interested in? Rather, it says, we should have had this specific we should have had this specific law about this practical implication. And the reason Rashi is mentioning that is that relates to what we were just saying. It's very nice that you're going to talk to me about metaphysics and the beginning of all things. I want to know how I take the grand idea and how do I use it practically on the ground, because the metaphysics only gets me so far. I don't have anything I could apply that to, but I want something that I could apply. And that also, the hubris of Rashi to come and say, like, God, you shouldn't have started here. But the attitude is, God, because the Torah was given to us, and I'm also aware that you wrote, Kishmartem vasitem. So before you start, so my wisdom is showing that your code, your guidebook, your Oculus works, your divine system works. And that you see by the fruits of your labor and how you act. And this is something that you hear if you're studying Talmud, you hear a lot, which is in Aramaic, lemai nafkamina. What is derived from this? What is the practical consequence? And when one is studying the Talmud, that is always the question being asked, right? Lemai nafkamina. I'm learning two different ideas. What can I derive from this? How can I actually use this on the ground?
Right. And I think the important thing to understand is that maybe that I'm thinking about is that in order to derive something, how can I use it? You not only need you need a memory, you need a perspective, you need your memory, you need a life
of an experience.
You need experience, and it kind of actually reminds me of AI, even where the most important thing that it has a problem with, it's a perspective. If you don't give the chat a perspective, it spews. It doesn't know, like, it's very unclear.
You have to ground it in some sort of experience, right?
Yeah,
obviously, you're talking about like a a linguistic experience over here that you're putting them into, but like you're saying the prompting of it is grounding it basically.
Yeah, I mean, like good prompting, it has to be grounded. It's either grounded in a specific database, which it already does, but in addition to a database, it needs to have a perspective, meaning that even if I'm just talking practically, if I need help with writing a resume for somebody, I need to give it a perspective of like you are somebody that can help with this resume, and it's for a particular role, right? So, and if it doesn't have that, it doesn't know how to apply. It will basically do it randomly, or it will do it somehow, but basically randomly. But it needs to have that. So it's almost like when you're a child, you accumulate some of this experience, some of this experiential memory, and then you start applying some wisdom, and you have places where you have memories where you can kind of like understand how to apply it and what you did better or wrong or stuff like that.
So excuse me for 1 second. Sorry, 1 second.
I think that was so profound that Chezi had to leave, figure out what it means for his life, and then come back. But okay, maybe I'll go through the comments. So this way maybe I can show Chezi as well that the Epicurean philosophy, the first doctrine is don't fear God. Okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting. And then being practical can help ground our perspectives and provide a tangible basis for understanding. Yeah, it's a good articulation of that.
Sorry. Upcycle, being practical can help ground our perspectives and provide a tangible basis for our understanding, like we were saying, which in Judaism, where we have a bar mitzvah when one is 13, a bat mitzvah when one is 12, and they are not commanded to keep the mitzvot at that age. Well, yes, they're commanded to keep the mitzvot. However, if they don't keep a mitzvah, they are not held accountable for it at that age. And the idea is we're giving the child 13/12 years of experience, because only then could you apply your wisdom. But we need to give you enough of that experience for your data bank, right? So to actually start using, because you could argue, like, if I'm thrusted in off the bat, needing to act right away, and I don't have any experience, how are you doing this? So the Torah starts with saying you do have experience. I'm giving you a tremendous amount of time where you're supposed to be having those experiences, where you could be playing with your temper and seeing how it interacts and jealousies and all those elements.
Yeah, and it's kind of, we discussed this maybe previously or two sessions ago, but how God reflects this. God's behavior reflects this as well, because he starts with Adam and Eve, like with these worlds that don't come out too much, or that get corrupted, and then he has to remove those, destroy those, and those start again. And I think the commentaries also say, like, why did God need to do? Didn't he know that this will be corrupt? And I think maybe one of them is like the free will, but another one is that he's showing that sometimes you need to figure out like what works, what doesn't work, and then you can build on top of that.
Well, I mean, you see God creates something and then takes a step back and says, and it was good.
Yeah.
And you can argue, like, well, of course it was good. It's from God. And the attitude of God was like, yeah, we're going to go with this one.
Yeah,
this
like a French critic.
Right. And there's also there is the difference. There's before, after Noah and before Noah, with the relations that people had with the animals. And there's wording of us, humanity, sort of controlling the animals, which leads to humans potentially not fully understanding their responsibility and thinking that they could control and own the world, back to building that, that the Babel and getting fully corrupted, to an understanding of living with animals, living alongside animals, and creating a more space of sharing. And again, this is happening throughout experience of God is seeing like how the humans are interacting in this quote unquote simulation that he's giving us. Okay, I think we read through this one, right?
It should be a lone tree, and I think
okay. By the way, just as far as the tree example, you could say like, why are we not giving an example of a building and foundations, right? Specifically with the tree, the roots, or the other way around, the branches sort of mimic the roots in a certain extent. And they also, they mirror each other in a certain way. Like the expanse, you should, just in general, the size of the canopy on top, if you see like a very large tree, the roots are at least that size as well.
Well, maybe they're saying at least, this is saying at least in a good tree. They should, right?
I'm saying correct, but I'm saying correct. In a good tree, in a healthy tree, where you would see that happening, unlike a foundation where you could have like an X foundation and a huge house on top of it, here the attitude is like your deeds should also be matching your wisdom in a certain extent. Yes, it's more foundational, as in that's what's starting it up, but like you're supposed to be echoing that on the ground.
Yep.
It's not supposed to be coming out looking like a completely different structure. And then people could see, he is coming from deep. There's like deep roots to his actions. Okay. Moving on.
Yeah.
Okay. Rabbi Eliezer ben Chisma Omer, Kinin upitrei nida hen gufei hahalachot, tkufot vegimatriot, perperaot la chochma. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Chisma, would say, it's interesting that they say, okay, the laws of kinin, bird offerings, and the laws of menstrual periods, these are the meat of halacha, Torah law. The calculations of solar seasons and gematria are the condiments of wisdom. Condiments of wisdom. It's interesting again, like how they interpret this in their English. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer ben Chisma. Here I see they interpret it as the son of Chisma, even though some has seen this as like a nickname of his, of being very strong. Some saw it as that he had a hard time remembering things, so he would constantly be studying, and like that strengthened his resolve, and he was known as someone that's like very, very smart. This is also happening. Is he a part of Yavne? Yeah, he's part of like the Yavne crew, as we dubbed them. And I mean, it relates also to what we're talking about over here. He was known also as like a polymath. Well, specifically like in the sciences or the sciences of the time, he was very, very very good at math as well. So he tells us about kinin over here, the bird's offering, and the pitrei nida, that these are the meat of the halachot, right? So we were just talking about previously about the need of Torah and Torah study, and the wisdom one needs for Torah study. And then here we're suddenly seeing these two abstract elements, which in theory, you would ask, based on how this continues, saying that this is halacha, you would say, here we have two elements which have a tremendous amount of doubt to them. One is you have these bird offerings. The reason there's doubt in bird offerings is there's bird offerings for different things, and those different things, they're actually sacrificed in different places on the altar. Some are lower, some are higher up. And the attitude is these hilchot kinim would have different formulas of what happens if you come to the temple and there's a mixture between like 4 different groups of people that got together, and they have the priest, the Kohen, doesn't remember anymore if this was this one, if this was that one, if this bird goes over here. So what does he do? And you have this whole robust mathematical equation of like, what do you do to get back to 0 so you can reaccount of what you're doing to get you out of this mess.
Mm-hmm.
And
the birds are there waiting.
I'm sorry?
And the birds are there waiting to be
And the birds are there waiting, exactly. And with regards to Nida, the menstrual cycles, so here too, were they counted correctly or not? There's 7 days where the woman is seeing an amount of blood. Then there's 7 days where she's counting where she sees no blood. And during this period, what happens if she miscounted? What happens if she wasn't sure? So again, there are different formulas of how you go back to 0. And these are complicated equations. So the knee-jerk reaction would be, this is a place where there's a lot of doubt. So you would think like this is not the Torah we're talking about that you're gaining merit from studying, because really, if you're studying this, you're finding yourself in like this is like not the ideal status to be in. There was confusion. You're not sure. This is not the ideal. So like you're really learning like first aid Torah right now to just get you back on track, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And because there's so much doubt over here, you would think like, this is sort of weakening your case with regards to the Torah value you're getting from learning this. However, comes the Pirkei Avot, the sages, Rav Eliezer, and tells us, no, this specifically is what the Torah is talking about. And the reason is because it's less about it's less about the larger picture, more about seeing God in the details, in the very, very small, practical day-to-day implications that you have. Yes, you could go around saying like, putting on your phylacteries, that's like a classic, but really is you find God in the moments where you weren't sure if you should have done this. And where there's that doubt, you should realize, no, even there where it seems to be very murky, even here, God's will, this is sort of in a certain case showing like the limits of how far the Torah study goes. It goes all the way into the calculations you need to take into consideration if you messed up. So it's that vast. Now, the stark difference from this next line, which is kufot ugimatriot. So here too, there's generally a different interpretation, which is you're talking about over here astrophysics and geometry. And here, these are fields where there isn't doubt, right? You need to be very, very, very precise. However, the Torah is telling you, if you were thinking like this is what was going to give you your validation, like, oh, okay, like now that I'm looking at geometry, it's clear that God exists. It's telling you, no, that's not where the focus is, because that is you're experiencing God's nature, like where we're talking about the wheat, but that's not God's will. God's will is now to you deal with like you were supposed to count these days in your menstrual cycle and you didn't. So through his will, there's still ways for you to understand his Torah and reach right. Back
and
to
what guides you and what guides your calculations is it's his principle.
Okay.
You need to use the principle in order to derive what is the correct decision.
Right. So some people will say that astronomy or like astrophysics is still considered Torah because it's used to make Torah calculations. Like you were just saying, I'm still using that. However, like astrology would be like the condiments, right? That's like a side element that you need to be dealing with, which is, let's say what Rambam would say. Rambam is quoted saying, Hidbonen ba'olam kedei shetakir et mi she'amar ve'haya olam. Right, like look into the world and look into the sciences so you could recognize and better understand he who spoke and created the world. However, the Rambam says that this is ultimately an expression of love. And at the time, he believed that like it's less about being in awe by nature, right? Seeing Niagara Falls and being like, oh my God. It's more realizing why at this degree of Fahrenheit, the Great Niagara Falls is going to immediately freeze because of the rules of physics. And once you fully realize that, there's a moment of love that the Rambam expresses, which is like understanding God, of understanding Him at a certain level, and that is showing you this this level of love. But the idea is that looking at this as condiments. So some people see this as, you look at this as like a dessert. It's more like the pleasure that you're taking on, and like Rambam is talking about, like love or astronomy. These are things that you are doing at the end. Some people look at this as these are the starting dishes, right? I need these principles. I need math. I need geometry as the starter course, because it's going to lead me into the Torah and better understanding the Torah world. I'm going to arm myself with geometry to understand how to build the tabernacle. I'm going to arm myself with psychology to better understand the soul and repentance, right? So I'm going to use these elements, and these are the starting dishes. You could also look at this as toppings. So it's that they're, again, using just the food analogy, I am enriching the taste that I have, right? So there's one level of interpretation, but then I could also add a scientific interpretation, and that now gives me like this extra taste. However, it's a topping because it's not filling on its own.
Yeah.
I still need my base. I still need my Torah. And then on top of that, I can decide to add on it my spices, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what we discussed. I mean, it's kind of like my comment initially when I said, like, we especially in our discussion when we talk this, we are able, and you specifically are able to bring in, both of us are able to bring in, like, here is how, maybe for Vicky is looking at this, and here's a little bit of a history and how it's affected there. Here's a, so here's like how this pattern is manifesting itself in a biological level, in a societal level, and then kind of helps us to maybe understand something more deeply. So that sounds kind of like what maybe.
Yeah, I would say going back to why we're calling it the Parperaot, is because what we're saying is that if your knee-jerk reaction was to be that, like, now that I see E equals MC squared, right? Like, well, all right, now that I see the equation, there's a shirt that says let there be light, and you see like the equation basically of like light, like in the mathematical equation of light. I would say that is like a moment where you're like, oh, what there's love. However, the Torah is saying, like, where you're going to find God, though, is not in, let's say, that in Spinoza's God, rather in Spinoza's God that then turns into like his will, right? Like, what is it that he wants? And that's also the sort of the difference between, let's say, the Greek world, which is God's wisdom, God's chokhmah seen in the world. And then there's or at least what Judaism holds is, then there's God's ratzon, there's God's will, which we manifest through, or we connect it through prophecy, through nevuah. And those are our two channels that we have. And going back to what God says, ushmartem v'asitem ki hi chokhmatchem ubinatchem. What the world, the way the world is going to see your wisdom manifest is not because you're going to be the Nobel Prize winner, even though that happens to be like impressive. It's going to be because of your actions and your deeds that will then manifest that wisdom, or that divine wisdom.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of connects to if we finish this as well, because this is going to lead us to something else, but kind of connects to the current situation as well, and
in Israel,
and how you think of like how, like, what is the, this is hard to articulate, but in what way can like, how should Israel behave long term, or what is the purpose? And and what is great about Israel. So some would say it's a startup nation. Some would say it's how strong the army is. We were able to build this strong army, but again, that might be the pilpul to the actual purpose of what we want to be known for, and what we should, or what God wants us to be known for. So, and I think this is part of the struggle probably that people are having in terms of what to do next. How do we bring about redemption? Might be like a religious word, but how do we bring up, or you can use nitzachon, right? How do we win, which is such a political word. But yeah.
So this is something that I've been talking around with Schlief, also like with Gilad on some streams about this. So I don't know if we're going to get too deep into this, but yes, obviously, this touches very close to home with that regard, which is, I don't think Israel is the light into the nations because of its cherry tomatoes or its flash drive. That's not; those are great, or not even startup nation. I think it's in what happened, let's say, after October 7th, the fact that all the country got together and everyone opened up their doors, and the whole nation, while the government was and still is mumbling, the nation completely galvanized and got together and created a tremendous support system. And those, to me, show how you could galvanize the whole people in such a way of acting in a godly manner, at its best. And ideally, you'd want that to make its way through the body politic as well. Again, starting from the individual all the way to there, and I believe that's what we're supposed to be doing. There's obviously a lot to unpack with regards to, how you see what our destiny is, how you see that manifesting, what does a Jewish / democratic or Torah / Enlightenment values, science and Torah, how those things work together. And there are more extreme expressions of that. There's a lot more progressive interpretations of that. And I am definitely trying to walk some sort of line. But I remain optimistic, for we are Am HaNetzach, the eternal people. And the only reason we're eternal people is to show the rest of the nations how to also be eternal, just to clarify. Yes, we're not leaving anyone behind. So yeah, I'll end on this, which I'm sure Jacob's not going to like. My son had a test, and on the book of Exodus, and one of the things he was learning about is that when Moses and his wife Tzipporah and his kids go back to Egypt, after hanging out in Midian with Jethro, they take the donkey, and sages interpret this by saying that this was the donkey of Abraham and this is the donkey of Messiah. So my son asked me, wait, how is that donkey still going to be alive by Messiah? Right. So my answer to him was that I told him, Billy, how in Hebrew the word donkey, chamor, sounds like chomer, like material stuff. I said, how when we were in the park, your friends are just like, I need the new shoes and I need the new ball and I'm like, you see how the chomer, the chamor, the donkey is riding them, right? It's telling them what to do. I'm like, but the Torah and God are telling us, no, we have to conquer the material world. We have to have it bend and move to our will. I'm like, so that's what it means, chamor. Now, why the example I'm giving is he's 9 right now. If he goes into politics one day, it's not that I have any problem with him believing in the Messiah, because his father believes in the Messiah, and I hope that comes, and I hope to see a great, fantastic leader. However, I also want him to have that understanding that I just gave right now, which is because that understanding then allows you to look at the world in a more nuanced way, and allow you to have a conversation across many, many boards. Because if you have people with political power right now that are insistent that it's going to be a man wearing white riding a donkey with a hat on his head, right? So that could lead to different policy issues. And that could, so ultimately what happens at home. So like my solution is, because I think we're living in like leaderless times, it's less about identifying leader 1 or bringing in political guy X. It's cultivating at home good people, mensches, and then we'll have a society of good people. And that is, I really think it's building bottom up, because I think like us getting the land was God's move, right? We have to step up to the plate. I mean, like, what more can you ask for, right? You have this miraculous return to the land, but it takes 2 to tango. If we don't want to manifest, and by the way, to be clear, that doesn't mean everyone now needs to be observant. I don't think that's what God is requiring from us, because I believe that, inspired, of course, by Rav Kook, that the secular movement in Israel is a divine secular philosophy that wants to define itself freely and not being dragged by God or being told what to do, so to speak, for the last 2,000 years. Rather, now that coming back to the land, there wants to be a natural response back to God. And I believe that God, in his graceful fashion, is very open to hearing a conversation from us that might look different than what it did 2,000 years ago, but he wants it to be genuine and he wants it to come from us. And I think that the secular movements in Israel have no interest in being defined by what it was for the last 2,000 years, but that has led them to sort of just close their eyes and ears. And on the flip side, I think the ultra-Orthodox and now the national religious extremist groups that took over are, in a certain sense, letting them know that there's one version of how to express your Judaism, and this is the way it is, and this is what we're going to turn into the law of the land. And I think for someone that's trying to still express himself in their own fashion, you're going to get the reverse reaction from them, which we've been seeing obviously on the streets of Israel. So there's a lot there obviously to unpack, which we could, discuss at another time. But yes, I think there's a lot we could learn from here of how we need to be acting and how we need to be discerning. And it's even the question of good and wrong, right? Like there's people that could be stuck analyzing like how many rockets flew from here and how many rockets flew from there. And there's a place where you have to realize like who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And on the other hand, if you're not aware of the fact that like there was a Nakba and there was a this, then you won't be able to obviously discern properly. So all these things are obviously very apropos, as we say. So see, there's a comment over here. To be fair, E equals MC squared does not apply solely for photons. I understand that there's that's a different equation. I was, I think everyone understood me, but yes, I'll stand corrected. And I see another comment over here. How do you treat your fathers? Similar to Christian church fathers? You'd have to expand on that. And like by your fathers, you mean like my specific father, or you mean like our sages? We don't really call them. Well, I mean, we do call them avotenu, but we have the patriarchs, which are like the fathers. Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac,
Yeah.
and then we have the sages. Basically, we have the righteous ones, but they're not really as church fathers. And as far as how to treat them,
the title is Ethics of the Father, so you may be referring to that as well. Yeah,
I realize that now. It's Ethic of the Father. So yes, it's called Pirkei Avot. And the reason it's called the Ethic of the Fathers, though, is because it's alluding to the sages embodying the patterns of the patriarchs, the fathers, right? So that it's connecting that. And there's also a sense as well that that we are the sons, right? The fathers were doing everything they can to create the pave the path for us. However, at some point, we need to take this practice and actually embody it on the ground in the land as well.
And again, this is what we spoke about: is like the building the deeds. The children are like the deeds of the father. I mean, there are the fruits, right? They're the deeds of the father that take time to progress. And just like you said, when you said we're leaderless, in leaderless time, and all we need to do is cultivate a bunch of menches. And from there, the probability that a big and strong tree would come up, that something would come out of that is more likely. And so, but sometimes this process takes time, or is less or more predictable.
Well, I think, unfortunately, I spoke about this a few weeks ago, how when Abraham needs to go, Lech Lecha, go forth, right? There's like a double, he goes twice. Once he goes by himself with Lot, once he goes with his family.
Yep.
And there's interpretation where there was his individual mission and his universal mission. And I don't think we need to now go all the way back. We could realize that God picked Abraham for his universal mission, specifically because he saw, I saw you're going to teach this to your children.
Yeah.
So we are learning this right now because he was successful, because God identified correctly what Abraham would do. However, there's this reaction where we're going back to being like, again, like, where should we go? And the attitude is like, someone has already done that walk. Someone's walked that walk and made that path for you. It's now you have to realize how to connect back to that living tree, right? It's a living tree to he who holds on to it.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mean like a whole new tree in that sense. So yeah.
As far as Ashwin is asking us, yes, the sages. So yes, we treat them with a tremendous amount of respect. There's hierarchies between different periods of time of interpretation, different periods of time, and that will give more or less authority to the sage of speaking. And then within those periods of time, there were people that were held different positions of power.
Right.
Yes. However, the sages that we're talking about over here, we don't have really titans like that anymore walking amongst us. We still are connected to that live tradition, and we still have heavy hitters, but we are talking about a different time. And there's arguments to be made that, like, while we are giants standing on the shoulder, while we're dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants, so maybe our vision potentially is we could see further across the bend, or we could see more. Their foundations, like the giant, ran extremely deep and were extremely solid. So again, that's on one foot, a small little sage conversation. But yeah, we're down with our sages. We're into them.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, not to prolong this too much, but one thing, again, going into your question about like me studying all these different things, one thing that I really appreciated that I learned about Judaism and how it works, its inner workings, is the pattern, the way that it asks you and people carrying the tradition to attach themselves to different people and schools of thoughts and Rishonim, like different people across time. And if you want to stand within the, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but if you want to stand inside the format of halacha, if you want to stand within the tradition, what you do is how you can both innovate and stay within it is that you attach yourself to somebody in the past. And it's kind of reflected in like a quote that I just heard from a rabbi say of, in terms of when he studies the Talmud, and maybe he realizes something and he says, oh, I think what they mean is A, and then he reads a little bit more, and then he finds out that they were talking about the same thing that he was thinking about. That's when he knows. That's when he gets like the catharsis. That's when he knows he's proud, and not when he thinks about something and he thinks, oh, this is something new that I figured out. If he doesn't find it in a text, that means he lost. It doesn't mean that he made some kind of like new realization.
Right. You're less looking to be original. You're more looking to connect to the source or connect to a tradition. And while I've loosely talked about this little corner being, let's say, a modern day Talmud, the idea was that while you have like these live conversations, if you're open to it, you are thrusting yourself into like this live conversation, going, spanning through time and space and talking about topics of, let's say, philosophy, politics, halakha, and they're all intertwined.
Yeah.
And, that is really allows you to go back in time. And it is the case that in the study hall, there are, well, I mean, you'll even see it over here. The reason I'm going and saying, so let's say Rabbi Eliezer, he's part of a Yavne crew, and that's because there's a love and kindred. There's like a familiarity with, like, I'm like, it's Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, like it's the boys. It's because I'm learning with them constantly and I'm studying with them. So you get excited when like they manage to succeed, and you're taken aback. You're like, did you hear that comment? Like the guy was just like out of control. And you feel it's not because you don't respect them. It's you have so much respect to them that they have become very present in your life, so to speak. And you want to be walking with these people with you, right? So when you have these concepts together with you, when you're going around looking at the world, you also have a little Rabbi Eliezer and you have a really Rabbi Yeshua with you, because there's all these different perspectives of these sages that you're taking with you. On that note, thank you all who participated, enjoyed, or joined. It's always enjoyable and enlightening when we do so. And we'll catch you next week.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Have a good day, sir, and stay safe.
Have a good day, everybody.